everybody, Gurmy's Coaster Yard here, and in today's episode of Germanator Studios, we are building a restroom facility. And you can see that's exactly what we're doing here. And yeah, that's it. That's the episode. So I will see you guys in the next. I'm just kidding. April Fools, even though it's not April 1st anymore. Anyway, we had an extra little space here by our little hotel building, and I decided I wanted to build a restroom facility to fill it out because we didn't have a restroom facility for our Western themed area yet. So I just built a simple building in a similar style to the buildings we've built for the Western area, and then put a little ventilation unit on top and sort of masked it as just like a natural open air ventilation system. And just putting in a door for like a utility closet on the back side there, and then just some decorative wall pieces around the outside. Nothing too crazy. And there is still a little bit of space to view the wooden roller coasters, like low to the ground final turnaround. So I wasn't too concerned about blocking that off because I know I said earlier that was sort of a feature I wanted to have with the ride is that high-speed turnaround. So that is still, I mean, it's not completely blocked off. But anyway, I'm just going through the other buildings and adding doorways because I figured a lot of the other restaurants and stuff that I've built have doorways, so I wanted to include that in here. And luckily, I was able to do that pretty reasonably. Um, so there's nothing. That's not a very difficult thing to do. You don't do even with the M Brooks cheat enabled. You have to delete the pathway on the outside edge before you can place those wall pieces. However, I think it makes all the difference in the end, and it makes the buildings. It's a small detail, but it makes things look that much better. One point I will make though is that I did not put a doorway on our saloon because traditionally saloons don't really have. They have like the swinging doors that are stereotypical, which you don't have in Roller Coaster Tycoon 3. But they're open air, so in that spirit, I decided to leave our saloon as sort of an open air entrance. Anyway, what I was doing along there, taking that path down, is I was going to use the dirt path and sort of bridge a gap to create a wood texture, but I realized that was unnecessary because we have the wooden cube path, so I ended up using that there instead, just to sort of create the feel of walking on a porch where it's sunken down there. And also, not having the terrain tile sunken into the ground means if we're moving the camera along there, it won't cause any glitchiness with the camera, which is a big headache when you're doing up close work on a building. So, and we don't know how much of that we may or may not have left. So, that will be a headache averted in the future. But anyway, as the title of the video suggests, we are building a log flume in this episode. That's the primary project, and that's what we'll do for the rest of the episode. And today's episode specifically is sort of going to be a feature on how to build a log flume and how to build terrain around your log flume. And this project in and of itself is going to be pretty straightforward or pretty simple. We're not going to get too detailed because if I'm being honest, terrain and log flumes, or just terrain in general, when you're doing custom terrain, is kind of the bane of my existence in Roller Coaster Tycoon. So I am going to keep it mostly simple, and keeping it simple up front with a project like this gives you room to change things later on, as I'm sure you will probably see when we continue this project in the next episode. But anyway, I figured we were due for a water ride in our park, and I thought a log flume would be a great addition to our Western themed area, in addition to our roller coaster. And having that mountain there, I figured may also help bridge the gap, or not bridge the gap, but really seal off the Western area from the modern area, because I feel like that's sort of a really big jump in like the historical timeline between two areas. So anyway, and mountains, as I'm sure you are aware, are timeless. Anyway, as you can see, a big portion of this project is just trying to figure out a layout for the log flume. And when I designed log flumes in the style of Splash Mountain, which if it wasn't obvious from the video's title or by the looks of this ride so far, we are sort of copying Splash Mountain. Definitely not to a T, but this ride is heavily inspired by it, especially in the front. Um, Splash Mountain has such a just perfect facade and perfect, um, viewing area for a log flume that when I do a mountain-inspired log flume ride or mountain-themed log flume ride, um, Splash Mountain is almost always my primary reference. So we have that main drop, which will eventually be coming out of a mountain, and those turns up front as a feature. Of course, if you're familiar with Splash Mountain, you'll see that it is a little bit different. I don't know exactly how to explain it, but the bottom of the big drop is on a lower level than that first turn that goes in front of the mountain after the ride begins. But anyway, that is not what's important because we're doing it a little differently here. So as important is what's happening on screen. Um, so you'll also notice we kind of create a short and boring ride. Um, what you see now is very close to what the final layout will be. Um, and the reason for this is that I don't really know where, if I do a story based ride and have sort of like more scenes, um, those would be where they are in respect to Splash Mountain, which would be somewhere behind the mountain in a separate show building. But I don't know where I would want that building to be. So normally, I connect the bottom of the drop that would enter the show building, which in this case is the drop after that first smaller lift hill, and I just connect that straight up to the base of the second lift, and eventually we may link those up, or we may break that connection and make a longer path through a scenic show building, or maybe an open air uh, story section of the ride too. Um, so that we'll have to figure out in a future episode. But for now, here's one of the reasons why doing terrain work with a ride, specifically log rides, can be the bane of your existence, and certainly is the bane of mine. Um, it requires you figuring out a layout for your ride, but then you have to go through and sort of delete one section at a time as you build up the terrain in order to basically make it work. So there I wanted that tunnel through the terrain, and you can see there's terrain above and below the ride. So, and I wanted to make sure I had the terrain above the ride as a reference for building the rest of our mountain. So it can be a bit of a headache, but that if you want your tunnel to be inside of the mountain, inside of the terrain, um, that I think is the best approach to doing that. Alternatively, you could build just a building out of walls and scenery pieces around your lift hill if you didn't want to do it underground. But to have it emerge from the mountain in this way, I think this is one of the best ways to do that. Um, Anyhow, I'm just kind of rambling there. So, another thing is that I like to do. I guess you'll see me do it in a moment. But you saw there where I was lifting up singular tiles, and there I'm doing it again, just to the height that I want them, and eventually I will move this section in a different direction. Um, I think I'm doing that right here. Yeah, so I sort of adjust this section to give me an additional tile of space between the mountain and the track. That way we can work on shaping it better. And I'll show you my technique for shaping the mountain here in a moment. But in the meantime, we are changing this final section of track to wrap around the outside instead of going through the mountain. And here you can see me adjusting these heights of the terrain somewhere around halfway between the top of the mountain and ground level. And eventually I'll use, I think I've talked about this before, but I call it the zipper piece because it kind of zips the edges of adjacent terrain tiles together if they are at different heights. And this is good for like a starting point for your mountains and terrain. And these techniques go even if you're not doing a log flume and you're just doing a mountain. You can use some of these terrain techniques as well. But here I am just zipping it up. You can't see it, but I'm putting quotation marks, doing air quotes whenever I say zipping, and that's how you can start to get the basic shape of your mountain. But you can see here spots along the track or where we have our little sort of, I'll call it the trough area, where we'll have like a little mini lake in front of the mountain. Those I don't really mess with. Those I'll do with a individual, like one tile at a time, and you can see me doing that here. Just where you don't want to mess with things too much because it might get messed up. You can go one tile at a time. And that's another reason that I don't love doing terrain is because it does take time and it is monotonous. Um, anyhow, and here I am. I decided I wanted the mountain when viewed from the front. Right now it's kind of skinny. And I don't think it's very hard to tell that, but I wanted it to have a little more width to it. So I decided to bring it out here in the back a little bit. And my idea here is that when viewed from the front, that will probably help to sort of give it more width and make it look more of a natural mountain as opposed to just a weird chunky stone sticking out of the ground or whatever. Um, and you can see that's why I also made it a little wider on the opposite side a little bit ago. And this will probably be an ongoing process too as we continue to work on this. Um, but sometimes you're working with a limited footprint. We don't get to this today, but another technique I use is using foliage. So using trees along the edges of your mountain or even along the sides to help mask the fact that the mountain isn't like to help mask the fact that it's basically a fabricated structure and isn't a real mountain. Um, so I've talked about using foliage to create a natural barrier between your pathways and your buildings, and you're essentially doing the same thing when you do it with a mountain, especially in this case where without that it would look nothing like a mountain, and probably in the grand scheme of things it still doesn't look much like a mountain. But for having something passable in a theme park setting, um, using foliage can definitely help with that. But I will pause that digression for now. That'll all be stuff we cover in a future episode, probably in the next episode. But we will see. Anyhow, we are running out of time, so I will see you guys in the next episode. I will not be uploading on Friday or the following Monday for the Easter holiday, but I will see you guys after that. Have a great rest of your day, and goodbye.